Well, how should we prepare for an aging workforce? To talk about that, I'm joined by Dan Pontefract. He's the author of the new book, The Future of Work is Gray. Dan, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Linda. Great to be here.
The second time you're talking to me, and this is on a different topic than last time. You're concentrating on older workers. Let's start, though, by talking about your background and how you ended up doing what you're doing these days.
Well, I guess I'm just a curious curator of leadership and management issues, and I sort of dig deep into what those are and then try to find, hopefully, some solution. So I started out in academia. I found my way into the corporate world as the chief learning officer at places like SAP and TELUS, where for about 20 years I was in charge of culture and the development of leaders and teams. And then since 2018, I've been what I call myself as a solopreneur, investigating cultures, et cetera, and trying to help many organizations and leaders with their change as necessary.
Well, it's a pretty challenging time to be doing that. I mean, there's so many things going on, so many moving pieces that organizations are trying to grapple with. You're drawn this time to older workers, the aging workforce. Talk about that in kind of a big picture form. Of what makes you interested in this topic, and why do you think we should be talking about it now?
Well, there's actually a couple of reasons. So the first, I'll try to be succinct, but the first is demography. So what we don't see happening in Canada and indeed the rest of the world is this demographic, I call it apocalypse, but let's just use disruption for the time being. So on the whole, yes, populations are increasing, but it's the average age that's increasing faster than the population. So we're not having as many babies. The birth rate's plummeting. Canada's birth rate, which should be at 2.1 just to replace ourselves without immigration, sits at 1.26. And where I live in Victoria, British Columbia, it's 0.85. So what's happening is
pretty old, yeah.
yeah. What's happening is less babies being born, but even with immigration, our average age is increasing. So the workforce itself, on average, is having a higher average age. But then what you have are some of the demons of past which haven't been solved, like ageism. And so when you have an aging average age workforce and archaic, antiquated HR policies, et cetera, including this hidden invisible ism called ageism that sits and percolates around the organization, what you see and what's happening is that there's a need for the talent restructuring, how and why we have talent models. But then we're stuck with these 1970s, 80s models themselves. So there's this very rigorous, I would say, friction that is unfolding, yet it's invisible. And I just wanted to go investigate and see how might we solve the riddle there, Linda.
Interesting. Demographics kind of my field too, Dan. I've been talking about this forever. But we used to talk about the aging workforce as potentially creating labor shortages because 20 years ago, it looked like we'd have so many retirements and companies were going to be open to keeping people around. And a lot of things have happened. We've had some brutal recessions. We've had the COVID pandemic. We have AI coming in right now. And I'm not seeing what I thought I'd see at this point. So when you talk to people, do you see unease about the retirements, or do you see, oh, well, we need to reduce payroll anyway?
Well, there's two sides of this particular coin. There's the individual side, then there's the organization. On the individual side, what people, again, aren't really paying attention to is the fact that, A, we're living longer. So hooray, right, Linda? The 100-year life is actually a possibility for some. Yet when you look at sort of the vintage bracket, I'll say, as those between the ages of 50 and 64, at least according to Sun Life, the average savings in Canada is 141,000. The median is 71,000. So inevitably, by working longer, people are going to have to live longer. We'll have to work longer. So on the individual side, I don't think people have actually sorted this out, the fact that they're going to run out of cash, even with CPP and OAS. So there's the individual side. Now, then there is the organizational side, and that is just math. Now, I get it. I mean, for years, we've been talking about the wave of retirement, the silver economy, the exodus of the boomers, et cetera. Should we have? But what we haven't ever paid attention to is just actually how that math is mathing. That bubble continues to sort of be its bubble. That is that boomer bubble. But with less Xers and certainly by percentage less millennials than boomers, there will be a glut. And so if your organization is not preparing, even with AI potentially replacing some of those people from some of the processes of which they used to do, there will be a demographic change for any organization. It's just plain old math.
Definitely a demographic change. I just wonder about the bargaining power because you mentioned ageism, and I cover this on the podcast. I sometimes write columns on this, and the comments people make that it's so tough for them at a certain age. They're just being shut out. Talk a little bit more about that, like how prevalent this is.
Yeah, I mean, I have, like I get calls, emails, DMs weekly from people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s saying, can you help me get a job? Like, what is going on in the market? And so what's terrible is that, in particularly when it's hiring managers and or the talent acquisition teams, who are probably the queen and kings of ageism, meaning the job descriptions themselves are sort of tailored from a wording and vernacular perspective to gear towards young, youth, vibrant energy, etc. And then when they use AI to potentially screen or scrub potential applicants, those with perhaps this same tenure in terms of experience, and maybe they are in their 50s or 60s, what's happening is they've set up the systems for the AI to basically scrub them. And then thirdly, these poor people on LinkedIn or wherever they're storing their resumes, even on PDFs, Word docs, etc., are feeling they have to scrub the years from when they had their gigs, so their jobs. And all of this screams of ageism at the talent hiring level. So again, whether that's PNC, human resources, or the hiring managers, and them thinking, oh, you know what? Cheap and cheerful. We can hire in those young people, but what they forget or don't think about is the vintage experience, the ruby level crystallized intelligence, as I call it, that can actually help them expedite their innovation, their ideas, production, whatever the case may be. That, to me, is where we're losing sight in the plot line, is the talent and hiring managers who are not thinking through the ability for people who are of, in their 50s, 60s, 70s with that tenure, that they can do good things still in your organization.
Well, let's talk about the terminology you use in the book. You have rivers, rocks, and rubies. Tell us what those are.
I love my metaphor, as my editor and publisher says. You never short on a good metaphor, Dan. And so basically, years ago in the 60s, a concept was developed by a couple social psychologists called fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence for, quote, the young, who came with ideas and verve, and they'd make some mistakes, but they were fluid. And then they somehow magically enter into the crystallized intelligence era, where that fluidity was fortified and therefore there was more experience. Now, my argument, and I love my music there, Linda, my argument is that we should take a hat tip from Taylor Swift and the Eras Tour. And when you think about the Eras Tour, not only $2 billion success, but what she did was that she looked at her albums and thus her eras and sort of did 4, 5, 6 song packs throughout her career. And that kind of helped me as I watched my 2 daughters go to the tour, thinking
Mine
about
too.
yeah. I was like, oh, wait a second. Isn't that us? Now, I'm the recovering human resources executive, and I never thought about it this way. So this book is partly mea culpa. And so I'm thinking to myself, you know what? Actually, there are 3 eras, 3 career eras we all go through because we all age. And so there is this young era. And I just said, you know what? Actually, that's like a river. We start, a river runs through it. We are fluid. We learn, we ideate, we make mistakes. We learn from those. But then you hit sort of mid-career. And mid-career, as I now say, you're in a river still, but you've developed some rocks. And those rocks are the sturdiness. You kind of still are flowing, but you're like, wait a second, I know how things work around here. You might be a leader, you might not be. That's fine. But you still enter your rock era. And then as that river starts to polish the rock over time, that becomes a gem. And so with alliteration, I went with the ruby. And so the ruby is that fully crystallized, intelligent individual who can see around corners, can coach, can mentor, can be a leader, cannot be, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But they've been through the runner, they've been through that river for whatever it is, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and they can help that organization in ways that certainly a river cannot.
If you're enjoying this conversation and want to bring insights like these to your next event, visit lindanazareth.com to book Linda Nazareth as your keynote speaker. Linda is an economist and futurist, and she is a dynamic and experienced speaker who has presented to audiences across a broad range of industries on the megatrends shaping the economy and the future of work. That's lindanazareth.com, or send an email to speaking@lindanazareth.com.
Are you seeing organizations that are picking up on this?
Not in Canada, but certainly in Asia and Europe, where the demographic apocalypse has hit them faster and earlier than North America and Canada. So, a couple examples would be BMW. So BMW initiated a program about 4 years ago, 2022, called the Senior Expert Program. And so it's voluntary, but if you're in a director, VP role, you've been leading a team, an initiative, whatever the case is, a unit for years and years, you can put up your hand to the HR team and say, you know what, I'd like to become the senior expert now. And so what they do is at the same pay rate level, et cetera, you relinquish your leadership responsibilities. You become an individual contributor. And maybe you're your late 40s or 50s or 60s, whatever it is, they still want you and your abilities, your intelligence to play either, conciliary, if you will, to the new leader that's been succession planned up, who's younger than you, and or you can work on all these different gigs and opportunities throughout BMW. It's just a fantastic example of Beamers, the BMW group saying, you know what, we believe in you. We've invested in you already. We'd still like you to be here. Your call if you want to not be the leader anymore. And then we get to promote from within someone who's a rock into potentially a senior rock or whatever, a Ruby level role. So there's a pretty good example in Germany.
We used to talk about this. I remember looking at this, 15 years ago, some of those programs in Europe, even, I think Volvo had something. And there was a feeling it was going to be picked up in North America. And we were going to have people able to work on projects after retirement. We're going to bring in people part-time. And it never really took it. We stuck with pretty traditional work structures. Is there a reason that North America has been so hesitant about this?
It is baffling. I have to be honest, Linda. I'm not quite sure. And again, you look at an example just from a couple of weeks ago in Canada, where our Minister of Industry is sitting outside of a mine and saying, we are going to invest in mining because we're running out of miners and we'd like the youth to consider this as a profession. And it's sort of an admission that we have not thought about there's one certain industry and one certain role where age is a factor. Then when you start in Canada looking at some other industries, whether it's truck drivers, whether it is accountants, whether it's health practitioners and nurses, like there's a serious void in certain professions that's more like Japan and South Korea and parts of Germany in terms of the demography change than others. And when you hang out in Toronto or Hamilton, Ottawa, Vancouver, Calgary, downtown, you see young people everywhere. And so you kind of say, it's not a problem. But when you look at the data and the demography, to your point, we've been looking at it for years. I think we've been blind to it, even though we looked at it. And it's time really now to, for certain professions, for sure, to do something about it.
It is time, but it's interesting, Dan. I think the attitude towards boomers, particularly and Xers from younger generations, if you're on X or anything like that, it's poisonous. It's like there's hatred for older people.
Yeah.
I wonder how the implementation will go if some of those younger people are in management.
There's a term now that's come out recently called the gerontocracy.
Okay.
And it's a nice word mashup. And that is sort of the flamed or inflamed, I should say, like millennials or kind of young rocks and rivers in my vernacular, whom are looking up to the Xers and boomers who are holding on to jobs and wealth and a gerontocracy, if you will, kind of a not so polite term, but a way in which for the younger people saying, look, what the heck? Like, could we have our due? Could we have our time? You've taken not only all the jobs, but you've taken all the money. And so we're
housing,
kind of ticked off here.
Yeah. So, it's hard to implement. If you have millennials who feel like that. So are you optimistic that we're going to see more open-mindedness, perhaps a little ageism? Like, what would propel this?
I think there's a couple of things. So first of all, at a board level, and quite frankly, and whatever your SMB or large enterprise here in Canada, I think at a board level, it's time finally to add age as one of the files. Okay. And so to me, if we have governance inside of a board level, and that is to do, like if you think about identity representation in your organization from an EDI perspective, age really should be part of that. So if boards can think about age and the composition of what their organizations ought to be from the River Rock Ruby composition level, and then looking at it individually as well by each of my age sectors, that's starting number one. Number two, I don't know why, and again, I'm not trying to bash all my HR and PNC friends and colleagues, but for some reason, this has just not been dealt with in the human resources, people, and culture front. And I'm not sure why, even though I'm one of them. And so I could tell you, first of all, like I never thought about it in my 40s and early 50s when I was an executive. So maybe it is a bit of, looking in the mirror earlier for those like in talent, for example, in the 30s, because typically, you're starting in HR, you might start in talent and you're in your 20s and 30s. You're not thinking about age because you're young. So I think there's some ageism, age-related inclusivity training that's required, not just for HR and P&C professionals, but for leaders in the organization writ large. And an example would be Westpac Bank in Australia. So they went and take a look at their 33,000 employees they had. They realized that just about 25% of them were over the age of 55. So they did something about it. They literally said, well, we better start doing sort of top to bottom to top mentoring programs. So mentorship, reverse mentorship, et cetera. They did ageism training. They did financial planning literacy training for all employees because they figured people are going to live longer, et cetera. So Westpac, a bank of, obviously over 100 billion in assets and 33,000 employees, said, oh, we're looking at the data. We should do something about it. So things like that is what organizations really should be thinking about.
And I know you're looking at it from an organizational point of view, but also for an individual who's in this age group and is frustrated and does have talents. Do you have words for them?
Well, yeah, two. First of all, be yourself. So when I counsel or coach or people come to me and say, what should I do? No one's hiring me. And then I start asking them about their resume, their LinkedIn, who are they trying to apply to? So this two-part notion is be yourself. If you're 55, you're not going to be 35. Like get over yourself, right? And you come to the game with that Ruby level experience for the right organizations is going to be useful. And I think that's where the 50 plus crowd, the Rubies, as I say, are really going to have to do a better job of reconnaissance. Who are the age inclusive organizations or leaders? Who is talking a good game about age, if you will? That's where I would want to apply my trade. But then thirdly, Linda, this is one that's going to be square in the eyes of some Rivers or some Rubies that might yell at me. You got to get over yourself and think about your transferable skills. Just because you were an engineer for 30 years, or just because you were a miner for 30 years, or whatever the profession, a health practitioner, do you have transferable skills? And you may not be that individual going forward in the next era. You might not be that engineer. So what is it that you can do to repackage yourself up? Maybe you take some training, maybe not. But just to say, hey, this is what I bring to the table. These are my transferable skills. And here's how I might be able to help you in this completely different profession and job skill. Now, of course, that needs empathy and good thinking on the receiving/hiring side. But that's where number three, I say individuals have to think about.
Interesting stuff, Dan. Congratulations on the new book.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks so much for talking to me today.
Appreciate you, Linda. Thank you so much.
Dan Pontefract is author of the new book, The Future of Work is Great.
Thanks for listening to Work in the Future. If today's episode sparked ideas for your organization, reach out. I would love to help you shape the future of work at your next event. To discuss your event and book me as a speaker or moderator, please visit lindanazareth.com or email speaking@lindanazareth.com. You can also visit me on Instagram at Linda Nazareth Keynote Speaker and send me a direct message there. If you did like this discussion about the future of work, please remember to subscribe to the podcast. Also, your reviews really help people to find us, so please make sure you take time to leave one wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for listening. And as always, thank you to Stokely Audio for audio production.